But can we talk about ADHD and debt for a second? Because this is such a common phenomenon that so many ADHDers struggle with, but are not talking about. I personally struggled with it too. I had a ton of debt, especially during COVID when my mental health was bad. But of course, we're taught to be like, well, I'm just bad with money, or, feel ashamed like we're failing as adults, instead of being like, hey, actually, there seems to be a big overlap between the way that my ADHD symptoms are and the way that I relate to money. So why? Why are ADHDers more likely to struggle with their relationship with money or maybe accumulate debt? And before we get into it, I just want a quick disclaimer. I'm a coach. I'm never, ever, ever going to tell you that you are doomed to struggle with money or that every single ADHDer feels this way or anything like that. I believe that every single pattern, whether it's related to your ADHD or not, is workable in some way. But we got to be aware first. So this is what I'm doing, is bringing awareness to this. So let's get into the reason. First one, big one for me, was compulsive overspending and just impulse control in general. If you spend as a coping mechanism, it's going to be a lot harder to reel that in if you have ADHD. We also have a tendency to struggle with long-term planning. So for many of us, we are budgeting paycheck to paycheck, and it's not because we're not making enough, it's because we're focused on the short term and what's right in front of us. So if you don't have a lot of financial literacy and you have a lot of shame around money, which most people do, it's going to be so much harder to be intentional with your long-term planning around money until you become aware of this pattern and really work on it. We also struggle with things that don't interest us. So if you're not interested in budgeting or finances or whatever, like listening to people tell you what to do, I know I've experienced this. It's like, oh my God, I can't be more bored. And maybe you even have a bit of a rebellious relationship with money because of whatever you were taught by your parents, and we are naturally a bit rebellious. Then of course there's the ADHD tax, hobbies every month, planners, trying to get your life together, fix your life overnight, self-help books, therapy. A lot of ADHDers struggle to hold down a job, which by the way, I believe is probably because you need to be an entrepreneur or a creative in some way. But anyway, that's going to impact your finances. And I think the biggest one is going to be our relationship with dopamine seeking and addiction. We are more likely to struggle with addiction, especially if you had a parent who struggled with addiction. And honestly, this is true for most neurodivergent people, which makes sense to me. Like, aside from the impulse control and all that stuff, of course, we're looking for ways to cope and deal with the fact that we don't quite fit into what society expects. But addictions are expensive. And if you're struggling with addiction, that's going to be the thing that's at top of mind, not oh, should I be budgeting effectively? My dad struggled with gambling addiction, and it makes a lot of sense thinking about his addiction through the lens of maybe he had ADHD. I'll never know, but so again, you are not doomed to struggle with money if you have ADHD. But I do want you to know that if you do have debt or you struggle with overspending or whatever it is, it's okay. It's not your fault. These are just things to become aware of and to forgive yourself for, and then to get help with it. I actually have a really inexpensive course called 5 Days to Face Your Finances if you're looking for support. Happy to talk about this more.